What's going on, everyone? This is Sheets, and we're going to be going over the UFC Des Moines card for this weekend from a DFS perspective. And this is going to be the first of three videos with respect to this card. This one, we're going to go over what I just think are the best plays DFS wise. Just if we were building single entry, if you were building big buy-ins, if you were just analyzing this from a DFS perspective, who the best plays are with the most upside and good medium projections and just literally the best plays. Uh, in that space, we're going to do another DFS video probably Friday where we focus completely on lineup construction, meaning, okay, we know who the best plays are. Now, who do we actually play? Because what we do in that video is focus completely on the big GPP, like the big kind of lottery throwdown contest where we're going to try, and this is going to be very hard this week, try to figure out the best way to win all of the money, not just a little of it, but all of it. And when you have a 12 fight card like this, you'll have this week, that becomes extraordinarily difficult to do. But we are going to still try. We're going to use SaberSim and maybe some other sim tools and other metrics to try to figure out how to take what we think are the best plays, shuffle them, and put together a portfolio of lineups that have a chance to win the most money possible. And then we're going to do also a betting breakdown where we take kind of a contrarian look at these fights and come up with some pretty cool bets, hopefully. And that's going to be tomorrow. Excuse me, maybe Friday. We're not sure, but we're going to have three videos total. So this one, we're just going to go through, come up with the best plays, and it's not that difficult to do. All right, to figure out who the best plays are in DFS UFC. It becomes much more difficult try to figure out how to build lineups with them. All right. As I mentioned, 12 fight card, but the one theme that we'll have going through this is, I would say of the 12 fights, maybe 9 of them are going to be determined by whether the grappler gets the grappling and wrestling going or not. And we're going to get into that as we get into them. And for those who are the uninitiated, that's a very big deal because grappling, wrestling, control time scores very, very well in DFS, even the absence of a finish. Obviously, if either fighter finishes the opponent, then that's going to score really well. But in the absence of finishes, the wrestling upside is very, very big. And if you could combine the two, you get wrestling and a finish, then you're really in business. In any case, let's get started with Ivana Petrovic versus Juliana Miller. And right off of the bat, Juliana Miller does not mind does not mind trying to play off her back. So if that's the case, if Petrovic can get this wrestling going, she's going to be primed for some serious upside here. And the thing is that she might not be too popular because her inside the distance line is not going to be very good. I mean, you look at it, Petrovic inside the distance is plus 215. And that's not that great for what is she, $8,800 fighter. However, the combination of her having takedowns in her arsenal, see 2, 3, 2, plus, okay, plus having Juliana Miller being willing to get taken down, that's a good recipe for fantasy points. Now, I will say that she does not look particularly active, even when she gets the takedowns, but all this control time has got to add up, So I don't know. I think she's going to be a very, very good play. Maybe not elite, but in a 12 fight card, you can't be too greedy. So I think she's going to be a pretty good favorite here. Juliana Miller, I mean, she came into this Hardy fight with, I don't say a lot of hype, but she was a big favorite. She got wrecked. I mean, in that fight, it was kind of nuts. And then she got a first round KO against her in her last fight. And then she's taking time off and doing media stuff and not really training. I mean, she's really in a position to get her ass kicked in this fight. So that's the way I'm playing. I'm probably not going to play any Juliana Miller. Petrovic is obviously a very, very good player. All right, Tom Peterson versus Dontel Mays. All right, this is another fight where one fighter really needs to get their takedowns. And if, in fact, he does, he's going to be in business. And this is Thomas Peterson. Dontel Mays has just atrocious takedown defense, and Thomas Peterson completely is just going to be going for takedowns. So if in fact, it works out, he's going to be in takedowns and control time and maybe just maybe even get a finish. But again, it's dependent on him being able to do that. Like he's not exactly the greatest. I mean, he had one takedown against Pogues. He did have one takedown against Gaziev, and then he got KO'd. He did have two takedowns against Usman, but he's not great. So I'm not saying that Peterson's a lock to get these takedowns, because if he doesn't, then Mays has got to be the better striker here. So in this particular fight, I think that Mays is sort of live as a very, very, very low-owned underdog here. Nobody's going to want to play this because, again, the idea is that his takedown defense is poor. It feeds right into Peterson's win condition. However, Mays gets paid too. And if he can, in fact, stuff the takedowns, look, it's not like he's a 20-1 underdog. He's only 2.5 to 1 underdog. So 40% of the time, pretty much, or I guess 30% of the time, he's going to win. And if he wins, I mean, I think he's pretty live for a knockout here, isn't he? Let me see. Mays inside the distance plus 325. So that's actually really not bad. So as gross as this is, I think Dontel Mays is sort of a live underdog. But again, it's a win condition thing. I think you do want to play Peterson because if he does, in fact, get the takedowns, he's going to be very live to get all that control time. Sort of interesting. So I'm looking at these first two fights. Which of these $8,800 fighters is better? For whatever reason, I really think that actually the Petrovic side is better than the Peterson side. I just think Miller is just, boy, not that Mays is any better. I think Miller is not particularly motivated. I think Mays is not particularly motivated. And I'm going to have to give this one another thought. But I will say this, that in the big GPP, I mean, I'm probably going to have to play all four sides of this because, again, Juliana Miller, oh boy. Let's look at this fight another way. Juliana Miller went into this Veronica Hardy fight as a huge favorite, okay? I was about to say, if she didn't lose that fight, then what would she be in this fight? But then again, she did lose that fight, and then she followed it up with a terrible fight. I don't know. I'm glad this is only Wednesday, so I can change my mind a little bit. But it's an interesting decision, right? Because if you can get the takedowns out of both these guys, Petrovic and Peterson, you have really, really good upside. But if they don't get it going, I think Petrovic has a better chance to win than Peterson. Okay, because I don't think Peterson, as bad as Mays might be right now, I don't think Peterson is going to be able to outstrike Mays, where I think that Petrovic might be able to outstrike him. So I think that's different. So I do think Petrovic is the better favorite than Thomas Peterson. That was a long way to get to that. All right, here's another one. Miesha Tate versus Yana Santos. So you have 8,300 for Miesha Tate and 7,900 for Santos. And Miesha Tate is 100 years old, but she does have a pretty clear path to victory here in going for the takedowns. So the other thing is that she does have a very good fight IQ. So you'd like to think that she would want to go for these takedowns. I mean, you look at these inside the distance lines, Tate inside is actually plus 325. That's not bad. That is really not bad at all. So between the takedowns and her inside the distance line on an 11-fight card, I mean, I think that Tate is extremely strong here. So I mean, let's put all these grapplers like together so we can just kind of take a look at all of them as they kind of pile up. All right. Bolanos versus Quang Lee. So this one, it might be a little tricky because I was about to say, you might think that Quang Lee is in a similar situation in that he has a distinct uh, advantage in the wrestling, but I don't think that that's necessarily the case. Like you see that he has a takedown and two takedowns, but again, Chris Gutierrez, he has terrible takedown defense, so this is not to be not unexpected. Um, and from what I saw, I mean, Quang Lee does not really have good wrestling. He got kind of a takedown almost by accident. So I don't think it's the same. So I think that the Quang Lee side is probably pretty weak. Uh, Bolaños himself had two takedowns, but I do think that this fight does rate to play out on the feet. So in that situation, you know, uh, you just have to look at the inside distance line. You're just kind of limited to that. And when you look at it, you see Lee inside at plus 400. That's no good. Bolaños inside. Bolaños inside plus 250. I mean, at 8,500, it's like on the edge of being a good play. It's not exactly a good play, but again, because it's a 12 fight card, we're going to give it a little bit of a break. So we're going to include him in our pool. I think that Quan Lee is probably kind of poor. I think that his takedowns are probably overstated, and he doesn't have a strong inside the distance line, and there's really no money line value. So I think I'd probably fade that side of it. All right, Jillian Robertson versus Marina Rodriguez. So this one's sort of interesting. If this were a larger slate, like a 14 fight slate, I would be a little less inclined to play Jillian Robertson. And this is why. So we have a very similar situation as some of these other fights in that Marina Rodriguez, she has very poor takedown defense. And she, once she gets on the ground, she usually stays there. So on the one hand, that's really, really good for Jillian Robertson. Okay. On the other hand, at 9,200, you're going to need more than just a takedown or two. Like she really needs her submissions. And in the absence of submissions, she's going to need a lot of ground and pounds to get there. And you don't really see that type of thing. Like here against Pinheiro, she scored 100, 102, 105, 106. So it's not as if she's smashing when she gets these takedowns. She's really dependent on submissions to really, really smash and get there. And Rodriguez really doesn't get submitted. She'll sit there and survive. So what you have here is on a 14 fight card. I think that Robertson might be sort of a fade, but only 12 fights. It's a difficult fade because you're getting the style matchup that you want. You're getting in two fighters are combining for the right type of matchup here. So I think that she's a very solid favorite. But again, when we get into lineup construction, it's a fighter you might be able to fade in the big GPPs. Again, because I think that her upside is not as big as it could be because her opponent, because she's used to getting taken down or whatever, she will survive. And it's not a Jillian Robertson like goes for all kinds of ground and pound or whatever. She'll continue to hunt, I think, for that submission. So I think Jillian Robertson is a very good play, but I'm not going to lock her in or anything like that. And Rodriguez, again, I just think that the combination of styles just makes it a very tough thing for her to get this done. Okay, Azmat Bakayev versus Ryan Loder. I happen to have been present at this fight in Las Vegas where he fought Roberto Valentin, and we weren't sure whether Ryan Loder's wrestling was going to be enough. And I have to say, I mean, he went off. I mean, he got one reversal, he got a takedown, and then he really went to town on him in that second round. I don't know, people were kind of not too high on him. I was pretty impressed. And he does have a D1 wrestling background. So what we have here is kind of a neat little correlation setup. We'll get to it a little later. But you have this Russian guy, Bukayev, who's never really, he doesn't wrestle D1, but he wrestles in like the mountains of Russia, in Dagestan. And it's always an interesting thing of what happens when these D1 wrestlers of American wrestling have to wrestle MMA against these Russian Dagestani MMA wrestlers, and it becomes kind of a point of contention. And this is going to be an example of that because Bakayev, he's got probably some good wrestling. He certainly is going to have better striking. I mean, knocked out Zach Reese in the first round. Zach Reese is an animal. Okay, so for Bakayev to knock him out, I mean, he's definitely has the edge here. But if for some reason, this D1 wrestling thing translates and Loader can get it going, and his wrestling can in fact overwhelm the the Dagestani wrestler or the Dagestani wrestling defense, then you're going to have a $6,900 fighter who's going to smash. Not to mention the fact that if he can get a couple of takedowns and some control time and then eventually, lose, this card is very live to have an underdog win and make the optimal. So he's a perfect example of that. So if in fact he wins, I promise you he smashes. And if in fact he loses, he's not dead. So this is a very important point on a card like this. And I want you to hold on to this idea of the D1 wrestling versus the UFC or the MMA grappling, because we're going to get to that in a few fights. Bakayev, by the way, I mean, obviously, I would imagine he's a good play, but let's take a look at this. For him to be a good play, he's got to have an inside the distance line of at least 110, maybe, probably, hopefully a little better. Let's see. I imagine he does. It's close. Oh, they make it hard, right? So Bakayev inside is plus 115. I think that plus the possibility that his grappling might be just as good as the D1 wrestler makes him a very solid play. I think he makes him very similar to Jillian Robertson. By the way, Robertson, I didn't even check to see her inside the distance line here. And this is probably what I thought, like something like this, like plus 180. That's why you combine that with her takedowns. It makes her a good play. And I think it makes her and Bakayev very similar. Bakayev has a better inside the distance line by a little bit, but he's a little more expensive. So, but I definitely like the Loader side here as a punt. All right, moving on up the card, we have, we're flying because there aren't that many fights. All right, so we have Jeremy Stephens versus Mason Jones. Oh, this is a kind of a gross fight. I mean, you have two guys that are both cut from the UFC coming back, I guess, because they're from Jeremy Stephens might be from Iowa or something like that. And nonetheless, I mean, you have Mason Jones is like a minus 500 favorite, and let's look at the inside the distance line. I mean, he's minus 110, which is nice, but at 9,500, you probably need more than that. But what you have here is you have 8 takedowns against David Onama. Now again, this is back from 2021, but the fact is that if in fact this is what Mason Jones decides to do, I mean, it's possible that he does something like this. Okay. I mean, it is possible he puts up 127 fantasy points with a whole bunch of takedowns and control time as he gets booed. Because nobody likes to see that. Nobody likes to see the $9,500 guy getting all these takedowns. But I mean, this exact performance is very live, okay, against an older fighter. So I don't know what he's been up to for a couple of years, but I presume that that's what he's going to try to do. So given his okay inside the distance line with that big wrestling ceiling, again, very strong. Okay, very strong. Jeremy Stephens, I can't imagine playing Jeremy Stephens. Plus, I mean, he's plus 500 to win or something like that. It just doesn't win often enough. Okay, we have Cameron Smotherman versus Serhi Saidi. Now, Smotherman is another one with some really poor takedown defense. And the reason we know that is because everybody was booing Jake Hadley for not going for takedowns. If Saidi was someone that we could count on to wrestle, I would take a shot. but I don't see any of that. So to me, this fight is just a striking affair that's going to be dependent on whether someone's got it good enough inside the distance line. And when we look at this, let's take a look. Saidi plus 300 at 8,400. That's no good. Smotherman at plus 320 at 7,800. That's really not that great either. So this fight is probably a thing. Montel Jackson versus Daniel Marcos. Daniel Marcos, he's 17-0, and he's an underdog. I know life is not as easy as that, but that is I would say the bottom line, but that's the line. And I can just see it. I can just see him winning. And people say, why did I not bet Daniel Marcos? He's 17-0, and he was the underdog. But we'll get into that, when we do the betting breakdown. But this fight, I think, is Montel Jackson's to win. And I think it's because he can win it in several ways. Like he can strike and he can get takedowns. He's got these like enormous hands. Okay. He's a huge reach and very, very big, So I do think it's going to be tough for Marcos. If Marcos wins, it's going to be because he just fought through everything and won a real hard fought decision, which is not going to score all that well. And likewise, let's look at Jackson. Jackson's inside the distance line is really poor. So the problem here is that if I knew that he was completely going to go for takedowns, I would not worry too much about the inside the distance line being like plus 260 or something like that. But because he could probably win this fight by striking, I just don't think he's that great of a play. So you compare him to, say, who was that other fighter from before? Let's look at, was it Bolanos? No. Even Peterson. Like Peterson, what was his inside the distance line? Peterson inside has got pretty much an equal inside the distance line to Montel Jackson, except Peterson's decision condition is going to be pretty high scoring, where Montel Jackson's decisions are not guaranteed to be high scoring. Okay. So I think that Montel Jackson is probably, I think this whole fight is probably, not very appealing. Now, another one that's probably not too appealing. Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Daniel Rodriguez, two kind of OGs. And usually the OGs like to get after it in the striking, and that's pretty entertaining, except that it really puts a premium on your inside the distance line. And you look at this, and neither one of these guys has a strong inside the distance line for their price. You have Ponzinibbio plus 300, Rodriguez plus 320. These are inside the distance line commensurate with like a $7,400 fighter, and here we have 8,208K. So it's a price range that you have to respect, but I much prefer Miesha Tate, for example, than either of these guys. Okay, so again, what we're trying to do is figure out a way to make decent money on this card. So that's why we're being very aggressive with our fades here. No Ponzinibbio Rodriguez, no Montel Jackson, Daniel Marcos. And that'll be pretty kind of a hot take, because I know people are going to want to play Montel Jackson. And even this fight, I think the Saidi fight you could fade. I think the Jackson fight you could fade. The Ponzinibbio fight you could fade. And if you could do that, then you're sort of in business. Like if you could get Miesha Tate home, for example, that would be really, really strong. Or the other way to play, again, like if you don't get Miesha Tate home and then you're rooting against all the other mid-range fights, then you're going to have to get, some exposure with Dontel Mays, Juliana Miller, even Ryan Loder. That can end up being very, very strong. Okay, so I mentioned earlier this kind of this battle between Russian UFC or MMA grappling with D1 wrestling, and this is another great example of this. So you have Bo Nickel, who was 3-time NCAA champion, almost a fourth. just barely missed going to the Olympics. Just elite wrestling. Okay. And he's got in the UFC and he's developed his skill set a little more. He's definitely worked on his striking and actually showed that off rather nicely in his last fight. Actually shows some pretty good fight IQ against Paul Craig. I mean, it definitely didn't do the fans any favors because they wanted Bo Nickel to do his thing and to go for a finish. But if I were going to draw up a blueprint for him to have won that fight, that's exactly what I would have done. Keep Paul Craig off the mat where he wants to be, just piece him up on the feet, nice and easy. And that's what he did. Was that great for his career? I don't know, but it was certainly great for winning that fight. And now he's got some competition. Now he's against Reinier de Ridder, who has like multiple championships in other promotions. And he came to the UFC and won a real scrap, okay, against Gerald Meerschaert. I mean, there was a lot of stuff going on in that fight. He was losing on the feet, really. I think he got taken down. He has reversals. I don't know what was going on, but it was a lot more violent and active than I wanted it to be as a big favorite. But then he came in and he basically ragdolled and destroyed Kevin Holland. 2 takedowns and a sub. It seemed like 2 seconds, okay? But it was in the first round. So what do we got? We have a pure grappler in de Ridder going against a D1 college wrestler who has a little bit of striking. So here's the question, like what's going to translate? Well, first of all, what is Bo Nickel even going to do? You know, if in fact he does go for this wrestling, is his D1 college wrestling going to outwork Reinier de Ridder's, high level grappling? So it's a similar question, right, to what we had in the Ryan Loder fight. And I think what would be kind of a cool correlation play, like if you wanted, is to play like de Ridder lineups with Makayev lineups. I don't know if it's Makayev, I forget his name, but the Russian against Loder. The idea being that is a play on Dagestani or European or non-USA wrestling. Okay, or you could play Bo Nickel you play Bo Nickel with Ryan Loder. That is a correlation play on, or kind of a macro play on USA wrestling. Difference is that Ryan Loder, we know, is going to just put the wrestling out there. Bo Nickel might not. Okay, it's very possible that Bo Nickel does exactly what he does in the last fight. He basically game plans exactly the way he should, in my opinion. And that would be to just keep it on the feet. He certainly has better striking than de Ridder, who has no striking. And does he have better grappling? I'm not sure. So if I were his coach and I were going just for the win, the last thing I want to do is shoot a takedown against this guy. I mean, honestly. So that's the difference. So it's not the same type of proxy for wrestling versus grappling as that other fight, because we don't even know what Nickel's going to do. So I do think as a result of that I want to treat the Nickel side as just a striking side. In other words, I want to treat this as at least for the most part, relying on his inside the distance line. And when we look at that, his inside the distance line is actually pretty good. Okay, so it's minus 120. So I'm very glad that that's the case. Okay. And he's only 9,100. So I think actually that when you give me the minus 110 on him inside the distance, which is better than both of these Julian Robertsons and even, what was his name? Bokayev, or even Mason Jones. I mean, it's the same as Mason Jones at 9,100. You combine that inside the distance line with the possibility of the takedowns and all that stuff. I think that actually Bo Nickel, on the one hand, is probably the best play on this thing. Okay. Of all those $9,100 fighters. those 91 and 9500s. We'll get to the main event in a minute, though. Um, I think that the combination of the savings plus the combination of different ways to win, I think that that's the best play. Now, with that said, you can prepare for the possibility of a repeat of last fight where he keeps it on the feet, doesn't get the KO, and now we have a 91-hour fighter that scores 65 fantasy points. That's just part of it, man. You know what I mean? That's just part of it. But I do think he's a really, really good play. Now, the other thing, though, is that DeRitter has to be a really, really elite underdog. It just has to be, right? Because first things first, if something objectively in MMA looks like a really good play, the first thing you should do is see if the opponent is at least a decent play, okay? Because those are usually the greatest bits of leverage in all of UFC DFS, is to find the best looking play on the slate and then play the opponent who looks okay. And I think DeRitter is a perfect, perfect example of that. So if there was a fight that and this is a weird one that I want to lock in, it would be this one. Okay. And that's, that does take on some risk, right? Because it takes on the risk that Nickel wins a boring, a striking based decision, scored 70, and then you lose. Okay. But it's not like you lose everything in that. You just don't get optimal. I think that all of the Ritter wins are optimal. How is he not scoring a bunch in his wins? So I think Ritter is clearly the best underdog on the slate. Is he better than Loader? Well, see, here's the thing. Like, Loader's certainly going to be lower owned than what's his name? Than Bo Nickel. What are their win odds here? So yeah, DeRitter is only like plus 250 to win, where Loader's it's not that much different. I mean, it's a little different. Yeah, I think both Loader and DeRitter, those are the two best underdogs. I mean, I think by pretty decent amount, actually. So yeah. Okay. And the main event, Corey Sandhagen versus Deiveson Figueiredo. It's a 5-round fight. And usually 5-round fights are very popular because, quite honestly, you have 50% or whatever, 40% more time to work with and to rack up fantasy points. And the other thing is that in this particular fight, you have a situation where both fighters will really benefit from those extra 2 rounds. So it's not as if you have, 2 big knockout artists who are going to knock each other out in the first round anyway, where the 5 rounds doesn't even matter. Here, the 5 rounds does matter. And that makes this kind of a difficult fade. In addition to that, you have Corey Sandhagen, who has shown the ability to rack up a ton of grappling and ancillary points here. I mean, you just look at his was against Vera. I mean, this was what do you have, like 150 in this fight? Let me see. It was 134 against Font, only 121 actually against Vera, and he did this with like a broken elbow or something like that, right? I mean, he had like a broken something, so he had to go for the takedowns. And here against Font, I mean, this was just like bludgeoning 20 minutes of control time. That's just nuts. And that's what happens, 134. And he only had 34 significant strikes. Okay, he lost to Nurmagomedov. Listen, he was competitive. Nurmagomedov, he's a beast. I mean, like, whatever. Figueiredo, I want to say, okay, this is what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping for Figueiredo to have his takedowns and his just overall grappling acumen be good enough such that this fight becomes a snooze fest. Okay. That is what I'm hoping for. I don't, listen, Figueiredo's, first of all, he looked terrible in his recent training videos. Looks overweight. We'll see how he makes the scales, whatever. I mean, he was fine against Peter Yan, I guess. It was good enough against Vera. Again, we always show that Vera can be taken down. He was good against Garbrandt. I'm kind of hoping that between the two of these guys, that are both very skilled fighters, that they have enough offense and defense to turn this into a 5-round striking battle that no one really gets takedowns to any real degree, and just somehow like Sandhagen wins and doesn't smash. Like, let Sandhagen win with like 100, and that's certainly in the offing. If Figueiredo wins, there's no way he's off the optimal. It's just no possibility. I shouldn't say that. Like, if Figueiredo wins and he scores 90, I mean, it's gonna be hard to keep him off the optimal unless Loader smashes and De Ritter smashes, for example. So if you're gonna play Figueiredo, it's gonna be just for money line. So we'll take a look at it. I mean, he wins the fight 20% of the time. I guess that's okay. They should probably play some of it. And again, Sandhagen, there are plenty of variations where he wins and it's not optimal, but I don't think there are very many for Figueiredo where he wins and it's not optimal. So I would love to fade the fight completely, to be perfectly honest with you. But at the very least, I think I want to get underweight on the Sandhagen side and just kind of root, you know? Or I will also say that if you do play Sandhagen, you want to play him with some really non-chalky stuff. Like, you want to play him with Loader, for example. You might even want to play him with like Dontel Mays, Juliana Miller, like those types of guys. You certainly, I think, want to play him with De Ritter. So, and the good thing is that you're going to need the salary savings anyway if you play $9,500 for a Sandhagen. Okay, so that is pretty much the summary. Perhaps in looking back, maybe I didn't do the mid-range fights enough justice. Maybe I'll address that again when we do the lineup construction video. Maybe I shouldn't have just outright full faded the Saidi fight or the Montel Jackson or the Daniel Rodriguez fight. But I don't know. That was my take as of now. Maybe I should give the Quang Lee fight a little more love. I don't know. I think I like identifying these 7 or so fights or 8 or so fights to get most of my exposures, especially in big buy-ins. All right, that is going to do it. I will see you guys for the betting breakdown later this week.